The sky was blue and clear on that special Sunday morning in London. People came early to stand near Westminster Abbey. Some had waited since the night before. They wanted to see the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children. This was a big day. The whole royal family would attend the yearly Commonwealth Day service together. Men, women, and children lined the streets. They held small British flags and wore big smiles. Police officers stood at every corner, keeping everyone safe. News crews set up their cameras, ready to catch the first sight of the royal family. The air felt alive with joy and hope. "I've been here since 5 o'clock this morning," said an old woman with a warm hat and thick gloves. "I want to see the little ones. They grow so fast." Inside Kensington Palace, far from the waiting crowds, the royal family got ready for their big day. The princess woke up early. She always liked to have enough time to help her children prepare for important events. She chose a beautiful blue dress that matched her famous ring. Her hair was perfect, not a strand out of place. The prince was calm as he put on his dark suit. He pinned his military medals to his chest with care. Each one told a story of duty and service. He looked in the mirror and straightened his tie one last time. "Are the children ready?" he asked a staff member who passed by his door. "Almost, Your Royal Highness. Prince George is dressed. Princess Charlotte is having her hair done. Prince Louis is still eating breakfast." The prince smiled. Little Louis was always the last one ready. At 7 years old, he was full of energy and not always eager to sit still for formal events. In her room, Charlotte sat very still as a helper brushed her long hair. At 9 years old, she was already learning how to be a princess. She wore a pretty dress that matched her mother's blue outfit. "Will there be other children there today?" she asked. "Not many," the helper said kindly. "But your cousins might come. And remember, you'll have your brothers with you." 12-year-old George was the most serious of the 3. He stood by his window, watching the palace guards change positions in the yard below. He already understood that one day he would be king. His suit made him look older than his years. When a knock came at his door, he turned with perfect posture. "Come in," he said in a clear voice. The prince entered his son's room and smiled with pride. "You look very handsome, son." "Thank you, father. Is it time to go?" "Almost. Let's check on your brother and sister first." They found Louis running down the hallway, his shirt half tucked in. The princess was right behind him, laughing as she tried to catch him. "Louis, please slow down," she called, but her voice was full of love, not anger. The prince caught his youngest son and lifted him high in the air. Louis giggled as his father spun him around once before setting him down. "Ready for a big day, young man?" the prince asked. Louis nodded with excitement. "Will there be music? And will we see great-grandmother's crown?" "The crown stays in the Tower of London," George explained to his little brother. "But there will be beautiful music in the Abbey." The princess gathered her 3 children and her husband for a quiet moment together. Away from the cameras and the crowds, they were just a family. She straightened Louis's collar and brushed some crumbs from his face. "Remember," the prince said to his family, "we walk in together, heads high, smiles ready. The people have come to see us, and we must not disappoint them." "We won't, Papa," Charlotte promised, taking her mother's hand. A palisade knocked gently on the door. "Your Royal Highnesses, the cars are ready." The time had come. The family would soon step out into the bright London day and into the hearts of the waiting people. The royal family stepped outside Kensington Palace. 3 black cars waited for them. The sun made the cars shine. Men in dark suits opened the doors. The prince thanked them with a nod. "I want to ride with Mama," said Louis, holding his mother's hand tight. "We all ride together," the princess said with a smile. She helped Louis into the middle car. George and Charlotte followed. The prince got in last, closing the door behind him. Inside the car, the seats were soft and clean. A glass window separated the driver from the royal family. This gave them privacy. Louis pressed his small face against the window. He wanted to see everything. "Look at all the people," he said, pointing at the crowds. It was true. People stood on both sides of the road. They held phones and cameras. They wanted to take pictures of the royal cars. Some waved flags. Others held up signs that said, "We love you and God save the king." "Wave to them," the prince told his children. "They've been waiting a long time to see us." George, Charlotte, and Louis waved through the windows. The people outside cheered and waved back. Some even jumped with joy. Camera flashes went off like little stars in the daylight. "Remember when we were little?" the princess asked her husband quietly. All this still felt new and scary. The prince took her hand. "The children are doing better than we did at their age." As the cars moved through London, the family saw many famous places. They passed Buckingham Palace, where the king lived. They saw Big Ben, the famous clock tower. They drove by the River Thames, where boats moved slowly on the water. "Will grandfather be at the Abbey?" Charlotte asked. "Yes," the prince said. "The king always attends Commonwealth Day. It's one of the most important days of the year for our family." The driver spoke through a small speaker. "5 minutes to Westminster Abbey, Your Royal Highnesses." The princess helped the children get ready. She fixed Charlotte's hair. She straightened George's tie. She made sure Louis had no smudges on his face. The prince watched his wife, with love in his eyes. She was so good with their children. "I remember my first Commonwealth Day service," the prince said to George. "I was about your age. I was very nervous." "I'm not nervous," George said, sitting up straight. "I've been to the Abbey many times." "That's my brave boy," the princess said, touching his cheek. The cars slowed down as they got closer to Westminster Abbey. The crowds here were even bigger. Police officers held people back. The noise grew louder. Louis covered his ears. "It's okay," the princess whispered to him. "It will be quiet inside the Abbey." The cars stopped in front of the great church. Westminster Abbey was huge and old. It had tall towers and beautiful windows. Kings and queens had been crowned here for hundreds of years. The prince and princess had been married here too. The first car emptied. Important people in fancy clothes stepped out. They walked to the side and waited. Now it was time for the royal family. The driver opened their car door. The prince got out first. He buttoned his coat and stood tall. Then he turned and offered his hand to his wife. The princess stepped out with grace. Her blue dress caught the light. The crowd gasped at how beautiful she looked. She smiled and waved to the people. Next came George. He moved carefully, just like his father. Charlotte followed, holding her dress so it wouldn't touch the ground. Finally, little Louis jumped out. He almost tripped, but the prince caught him just in time. The family stood together on the steps of Westminster Abbey. Above them, the great doors were open, ready to welcome them. Inside, hundreds of guests already waited. Music played softly from within the church. "Ready?" the prince asked his family. They all nodded. Together, they took a deep breath. It was time to make their grand entrance. The great doors of Westminster Abbey stood open wide. The royal family paused at the top of the steps. Everyone wanted to see them. Cameras clicked like crazy. The prince put his hand gently on his wife's back. This small touch gave her strength. A man in black and gold robes walked out to meet them. This was the Dean of Westminster. He bowed to the family. "Welcome, Your Royal Highnesses," he said with a warm smile. "We are honored by your presence today." The prince shook his hand. "Thank you for having us. The Abbey looks beautiful, as always." The dean bent down to speak to the children. "And welcome to you, young princes and princess. I hope you enjoy the service today." Louis hid a little behind his mother's dress. He was suddenly shy. Charlotte gave a perfect small curtsy, just as she had been taught. George shook the dean's hand, copying his father. "Shall we?" the dean asked, turning to lead them inside. The family walked through the great doors. Inside, Westminster Abbey was cool and quiet. Soft light came through tall, colored windows. The ceiling seemed to reach up to heaven itself. The stone floors had been walked on by kings and queens for hundreds of years. As they entered, everyone inside stood up. There were over 2,000 people in the abbey. They all turned to watch the royal family. Louis's eyes grew wide. He had never seen so many people in one place before. "Stay close," the princess whispered to her children. Music began to play. The organ made deep, beautiful sounds that filled the whole church. A choir of boys and girls in white robes sang. Their voices were clear and sweet. The family walked slowly down the middle aisle. This was called the procession. People bowed and curtsied as they passed. Some smiled. Others looked serious. Every eye was on the royal family. Charlotte walked with perfect posture. She had practiced walking this way many times. George kept his eyes forward, his face calm. Louis tried to copy his older brother and sister, but he couldn't help looking around at everything. "Look, Mama," Louis whispered, pointing up. "Angels." He was looking at the beautiful carvings on the ceiling. Some did look like angels flying high above them. "Shay," the princess said gently. "We'll talk about them later." The king and queen waited at the front of the abbey. The king stood tall in his navy suit. The queen wore a beautiful green dress and hat. They smiled as they saw their family approach. When they reached the front, the prince and princess bowed and curtsied to the king and queen. The children did the same. Then the king reached out to touch his grandchildren's shoulders. This was his way of showing love in public. "You all look splendid," the king said quietly. "Especially you, Louis, growing so fast." Louis beamed with pride. The family took their seats in the front row. These seats were special, with red cushions and small books for the service. The princess helped Louis with his book. George opened his own. Charlotte sat between her brothers, her feet barely touching the floor. The dean walked to the front of the church. "Let us all stand," he said in a strong voice. Everyone in the abbey stood up. The service was about to begin. More than 50 flags were brought in. Each flag came from a different country in the Commonwealth. The flags were bright and colorful. People carrying the flags wore clothes from their own countries. "That's South Africa," George whispered to Louis, pointing at one flag. "And that's Canada, where we visited last year." Louis nodded, watching the flags with big eyes. Music played as the flags were placed at the front of the abbey. The royal family stood straight and proud. This day was about more than just them. It was about all the countries that worked together as friends. The princess looked at her husband and children. She felt proud of how well they were doing. Even little Louis was being good. The prince caught her eye and gave her a small smile. They were in this together, a family on show for the world, but still connected to each other. After all the flags were in place, everyone sat down. A man with a loud, clear voice welcomed them to the abbey. Louis wiggled in his seat. Sitting still was hard for him. The princess reached into her small bag and took out a tiny notebook and pencil. She gave them to Louis. Now he could draw quietly if he got bored. The first part of the service began. A woman in bright clothes came to the front. She read from an old book. Her voice was strong and filled the huge space. George listened carefully. Charlotte sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. The prince and princess watched their children with pride. The king stood up next. Everyone in the abbey became very quiet. The king spoke about how important the Commonwealth was. He talked about countries working together and being friends. His voice was kind but firm. The prince listened to his father with great respect. One day, these would be his words to say. Then the choir began to sing again. Their voices rose up to the high ceiling. The music was so beautiful that even Louis stopped drawing to listen. The princess closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over her. The prince reached for her hand. They held hands quietly, where no one could see. After the singing, People from different countries came forward. Each person wore special clothes from their homeland. Some had bright colors. Others wore white or black. They shared stories and poems about their countries. A tall man from Jamaica spoke about his island's beauty. A woman from India talked about peace. A young boy from Australia read a poem about the land down under. It was like taking a trip around the world without leaving the Abbey. Lewis leaned over to Charlotte. "Where are they all from?" he whispered. "Countries in the Commonwealth," Charlotte whispered back. "Grandfather is in charge of all of them." "Will Papa be in charge one day?" Lewis asked. "Yes," Charlotte said. "And then George after that." Lewis looked at his older brother with big eyes. George sat up even straighter when he heard his name. The service continued with more readings and songs. The princess noticed that Lewis was getting restless again. She took a small mint from her bag and gave it to him. This would keep him busy for a while. The prince smiled at his wife, thankful for her quick thinking. In the middle of the service, something special happened. Dancers came into the middle of the church. They wore colorful clothes with beads and feathers. Music with drums began to play. The dancers moved in ways the children had never seen before. "Where are they from?" Lewis asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Ghana," the princess told him quietly. "It's a country in Africa." The dancers spun and jumped. Their feet made soft sounds on the stone floor. Their hands told stories without words. Everyone watched with joy. This was not the usual serious church service. This was a celebration of all the different people in the Commonwealth. When the dance ended, everyone clapped. Even the king and queen joined in the applause. The dancers bowed low to the royal family before leaving. Next came a group of children from schools across London. They walked in carrying small lights. Each light stood for hope and friendship. The children sang a song about peace. Their young voices filled the Abbey with hope. Charlotte watched the children with interest. Some were her age. She wondered what it would be like to go to school with other children, instead of having teachers at home. The prince noticed his daughter's face and wondered what she was thinking. The service moved on to prayers. The dean asked everyone to bow their heads. The royal family did so. The prince and princess had taught their children how to be respectful during prayer time, no matter what people believed. Lewis peeked a little but quickly closed his eyes again when he saw his father watching. As the prayers finished, a ray of sunlight came through one of the colored windows. It made a rainbow on the floor near the royal family. Lewis pointed at it with excitement. The princess smiled at her youngest son's joy in something so simple. Even in this grand place, with all these important people, a rainbow of light could still be the most wonderful thing. The service was now halfway done. Lewis began to fidget again. He was trying hard to be good, but he was only 7 years old. Sitting still for so long was difficult. He dropped his pencil, and it made a small sound as it hit the floor. The princess bent down to pick it up. When she sat back up, she whispered something in Lewis's ear. He nodded and sat up straighter. The prince gave his son an encouraging smile. A new speaker came to the front of the Abbey. This was a famous football player who worked with children in poor areas. He talked about how sports could bring people together. George listened closely. He loved football and played it whenever he could. "I've seen him play on TV," George whispered to his father. The prince nodded. "He's done great things both on and off the field." While the football player spoke, Lewis began to yawn. He tried to hide it behind his hand, but cameras caught the moment. Later, this picture would be in newspapers around the world. People would smile at the little prince being so normal, just a tired child at a long event. The princess noticed Lewis was getting sleepy. She put her arm around him, and he leaned against her side. Charlotte sat perfectly still, her back never touching the chair. She was determined to show everyone how grown-up she could be. After the football player finished, there was more singing. This time, a famous singer performed a song about hope and unity. Her voice was so powerful that it seemed to make the walls of the old abbey shake. Even Lewis sat up to listen. The king watched his family from his seat. He looked at his son, the prince, with pride. One day, the prince would sit where he sat now. And after that, young George would take his father's place. The royal line would continue, just as it had for hundreds of years. Outside the abbey, the crowds were still waiting. They stood in the cold, hoping to see the royal family again when they left. Police officers walked among the people, making sure everyone was safe. News reporters talked to their cameras, telling the world about what was happening inside. Back in the abbey, something unexpected happened. As the famous singer finished her song, little Louis began to clap too early. The abbey was silent for a moment, then filled with gentle laughter. The princess blushed a little, but she smiled at her son. The prince patted Louis on the shoulder. "It was very good, wasn't it?" he whispered to Louis. Louis nodded, not understanding why everyone had laughed. To him, the song was over, so it was time to clap. The king caught the princess's eye and gave her a warm smile. He remembered when his own children were small and did similar things. The service moved on to its final parts. Another important person came to speak. This was the head of the Commonwealth Games, a big sports event that happened every 4 years. She spoke about how sports brought young people together from all Commonwealth countries. As she spoke, Charlotte noticed something interesting. Behind the woman was a small mouse, running along the edge of the wall. Charlotte's eyes grew wide. She tugged on George's sleeve and pointed. George saw it too, and had to cover his mouth to stop from laughing. The prince followed his children's gaze and saw the tiny creature. He gave them both a look that said, "Not a word about this." But his eyes were smiling. Even in this grand, important place, nature found its way in. The mouse disappeared behind a large flower display, and the children returned their attention to the service. The final speaker was done, and now it was time for the last hymn. Everyone stood up. The organ played, and the choir began to sing. The royal family sang too, their voices joining thousands of others. Louis didn't know all the words, but he hummed along with the tune. Charlotte sang perfectly, knowing every word. George sang quietly, but correctly. The prince and princess sang clearly, setting an example for their children. As the music filled the ancient abbey, sunlight streamed through the windows again. It lit up the royal family's faces. Photographers captured this perfect moment. The future king and queen with their 3 beautiful children, surrounded by light and music in one of the most famous churches in the world. As the last song ended, everyone sat down again. The Dean of Westminster walked to the front. He thanked everyone for coming to this special service. He asked them all to stand for the blessing. The royal family stood with straight backs. Even Louis stood tall now, copying his father and brother. The dean raised his hands and said beautiful words asking for peace and goodness for all people. His voice echoed in the quiet abbey. When he finished, everyone said, "Amen" together. The sound of thousands of voices saying the same word at once was powerful. Now came an important moment. The king and queen would leave first. Everyone had to wait until they walked out. The king stood and offered his arm to the queen. They moved with slow, careful steps down the middle aisle. People bowed their heads as they passed. The prince and princess watched their children. Soon it would be their turn to walk out. This part had to look perfect. Many cameras would be filming them. "Remember," the prince whispered to his family, "heads up, walk slowly, smile gently." Louis nodded seriously. He wanted to make his parents proud. Charlotte smoothed her dress one more time. George stood ready, looking more like his father every day. The signal came. It was time for the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children to leave. The prince took his wife's hand. George, Charlotte, and Louis lined up behind them. The family began to walk down the long aisle toward the great doors. As they walked, people on both sides smiled and nodded. Some important people reached out their hands. The prince and princess stopped a few times to shake hands. The children stayed close, remembering their training. "You're doing very well," the princess whispered to Louis when they paused briefly. His face lit up with pride. Near the middle of the abbey, they met the Prime Minister. He bowed slightly to the royal family. The prince shook his hand firmly. "Wonderful to see the children here today," the Prime Minister said with a warm smile. "They've been looking forward to it," the prince replied. This wasn't completely true, but it was the right thing to say. As they continued walking, Charlotte noticed a little girl about her age watching her with big eyes. The little girl was wearing a pretty pink dress. Charlotte gave her a small wave. The girl's face broke into a huge smile. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life. Louis was getting tired of walking slowly. He wanted to run to the big doors, but he remembered his mother's words about being good. He took a deep breath and kept walking properly. The princess saw this small struggle and felt proud of her youngest son. George walked perfectly, nodding at people he recognized from other royal events. At 12 years old, he already understood his role well. An old man with many medals on his chest gave George a military salute. George returned it, just as his father had taught him. Finally, the family reached the great doors of the abbey. Bright light poured in from outside. They could hear the crowds cheering beyond. The dean was waiting to say goodbye to them. "Thank you for gracing us with your presence," the dean said, bowing to the prince and princess. "And thank you, young princes and princess, for being so well behaved." Louis smiled at this. He had worked hard to be good. The dean gave each child a small gold pin with the abbey symbol on it. This was a special gift that most visitors didn't receive. The family paused just inside the doors. Outside, thousands of people waited to see them again. There would be more cameras, more shouting, and more waving. The prince looked at his wife. She nodded that she was ready. "Can we get ice cream after this?" Louis asked suddenly. His question was so normal, so childlike, that both the prince and princess had to hold back their laughter. "We'll see," the prince said, the answer parents everywhere give when they might say yes later. The princess straightened Louis's collar one last time. She checked that Charlotte's hair was still neat. She gave George a proud smile. Then she turned to her husband and nodded. "Ready," she said. The prince took a deep breath and stepped forward. The doors opened fully. Sunlight bathed the family in golden light. The crowd outside erupted in cheers. Camera flashes went off everywhere. The royal family stepped out together, ready to face the waiting world. The bright sun made the family blink as they stepped outside Westminster Abbey. The noise hit them like a wave. Thousands of people cheered and called their names. Flags waved in the air. The sounds echoed off the tall buildings around them. "Wave to everyone," the prince reminded his children softly. The family stood at the top of the steps. They made a perfect picture against the old stone church. The princess's blue dress caught the light. The prince stood tall beside her. The three children lined up in front of their parents. They all waved to the crowds. Louis waved with his whole arm, moving it back and forth quickly. Charlotte gave small, perfect waves, turning her wrists gently like her mother had taught her. George waved in a more grown-up way, just like his father. Photographers stood in a special area. Their cameras clicked and flashed. These pictures would be in newspapers and on websites all over the world tomorrow. The royal family held their pose for almost a minute, giving everyone a chance to take good photos. The princess bent down and whispered something to Louis. He nodded and took a small step forward. This was something they had practiced. Louis gave a little bow to the crowd. People cheered even louder. They loved seeing the youngest prince being so sweet. Then it was Charlotte's turn. She stepped forward and did a perfect small curtsy. Her dress spread out around her like a flower. More cheers came from the crowd. Some people even clapped their hands. Finally, George moved forward. He gave a proper bow, bending at the waist just the right amount. He was old enough now to understand how important these moments were. The crowd loved it. Some people called out, "Future King." George tried not to smile too much at this. After the children's special greetings, the family began to walk down the wide stone steps. Security men in dark suits stood nearby, watching everything carefully. The prince kept his hand on Louis's shoulder to make sure the little boy didn't trip. At the bottom of the steps, a surprise waited. A group of children from a local school stood in a line. They wore their school uniforms and held small bunches of flowers. Their teachers had brought them here for this special moment. The royal family stopped to meet the children. The princess bent down to speak to a small girl with red hair who looked very nervous. The prince shook hands with a boy who couldn't stop smiling. George, Charlotte, and Louis stood close to their parents, watching. "These flowers are for you," said the red-haired girl. Her voice was so quiet that only the princess could hear her. The girl held out a bunch of blue flowers that matched the princess's dress perfectly. "Thank you so much," the princess said, taking the flowers. "They're beautiful. Did you pick them yourself?" The little girl nodded, her face turning pink with happiness. The other children gave flowers to the prince and to each of the royal children. Louis got a bunch of yellow daisies. He smiled so wide that his cheeks must have hurt. Charlotte received pink roses, her favorite flower. George was given white lilies, which he held carefully. When all the flowers had been given, the children from the school sang a short song. They had practiced for weeks. Their voices were sweet and clear in the spring air. The royal family listened with big smiles. Even George, who sometimes thought he was too old for such things, enjoyed the simple song. After the song ended, the prince thanked the children and their teachers. "That was wonderful," he said. "You should all be very proud." The teachers beamed with happiness. This moment would be the highlight of their year. The school children would remember this day for the rest of their lives. It was time to move on. The royal cars waited at the bottom of the square. Before they walked to the cars, the family turned to wave one more time at Westminster Abbey. This building had been part of their family's history for centuries. Kings and queens had been crowned here. The prince and princess had been married here. It was a special place for all of them. "Did I do well, Mama?" Louis asked quietly as they walked toward the cars. The princess squeezed his hand. "You did perfectly," she said. "I'm very proud of you." Louis walked a little taller after hearing these words. The prince smiled at his wife, grateful for her gentle way with their children. Charlotte and George walked beside them, still holding their flowers carefully. The royal family reached their cars. The same black cars that brought them to Westminster Abbey now waited to take them home. The prince opened the door for his wife and children. The princess helped Louis climb in first, then Charlotte. George got in by himself, sitting tall on the soft leather seat. Before the prince got in, he turned to wave once more to the crowd. People cheered louder when they saw this final wave. The prince smiled and then joined his family in the car. The door closed with a soft, heavy sound. Inside, it was quiet after all the noise outside. "That went very well," the prince said to his family. "You were all wonderful." The children smiled, happy with their father's praise. The cars began to move slowly away from the abbey. Police motorcycles drove in front and behind them. This was for safety. The crowds waved as the royal cars passed by. Inside the car, the family relaxed a little. Louis took off his small tie and put it in his pocket. The princess didn't stop him. She knew he had been wearing it for a long time. Charlotte carefully put her flowers on her lap. She didn't want them to get crushed. George looked out the window, watching the people as they passed. "Can we have ice cream now?" Louis asked, remembering his question from earlier. The prince and princess looked at each other. They smiled. After such a long formal event, maybe a treat was a good idea. "I think that's a wonderful idea," the princess said. "You all deserve something special after being so good today." The prince leaned forward and spoke to the driver through a small window. "Could we make a small stop before going back to the palace?" "Of course, Your Royal Highness," the driver replied. The car changed direction. Instead of going straight back to Kensington Palace, they turned toward a quiet part of London. The prince knew a small ice cream shop that made the best ice cream in the city. The owner was a kind old man who never told anyone when the royal family visited. As they drove, the princess took out her phone and showed the children some pictures that were already on the news websites. There they were, standing on the steps of Westminster Abbey. The pictures looked perfect. "Look how tall you look, George," the princess said. "And Charlotte, your curtsy was beautiful." "What about me?" Louis asked, leaning over to see the phone. The princess showed him a picture where he was waving with his whole arm. His face was full of joy. "You look like you're having the most fun of all," she said. Louis smiled proudly. Soon the cars stopped in front of a small shop with a red door. The security team got out first. They checked that everything was safe. Then they nodded to the prince. The royal family could get out. The shop owner was waiting at the door. When he saw who had come to visit, his eyes grew wide with surprise. He bowed low to the family. "Welcome, your royal highnesses," he said. "It is such an honor." "Thank you for having us," the prince replied. "We've had a long day at Westminster Abbey and thought some ice cream might be nice." The shop owner led them inside. The shop was empty of other customers. This was planned for safety. The room was small but clean, with white tables and red chairs. Pictures of old London hung on the walls. The smell of fresh waffle cones filled the air. "Please, sit down," the shop owner said. "What flavors would you like today?" The children looked at the ice cream display with big eyes. There were more than 20 different flavors, some they had never seen before. Louis pressed his face against the glass to see everything better. "I want chocolate," Louis said quickly. "Louis," the princess reminded him gently. "What do we say?" "Please, may I have chocolate?" Louis corrected himself. Charlotte took longer to decide. She looked at all the choices carefully. "Strawberry, please," she finally said. George chose vanilla with chocolate sauce. It was his favorite. The prince picked coffee flavor, and the princess chose lemon. The shop owner made their ice cream cones with shaking hands. He was so excited to serve the royal family. When everyone had their ice cream, they sat at a table in the corner. For a few minutes, they were just like any other family enjoying a treat together. No cameras, no crowds, no formal rules to follow. Just a mother, father, and their 3 children eating ice cream after a long day. The royal family finished their ice cream. Louis had chocolate all around his mouth. The princess took a small white cloth from her bag and gently wiped his face. Charlotte ate her strawberry ice cream neatly, not dropping even one bit. George finished his vanilla cone and helped the shop owner clear the table. "Thank you for the wonderful ice cream," the prince said, shaking the owner's hand. "It was just what we needed after a long day." "It was my honor," the shop owner replied. His eyes were wet with happy tears. "Please come back any time." The family thanked him again and left the shop. Outside, the sun was starting to go down. The sky was turning soft pink and orange. It had been a long day, and everyone was getting tired. The cars were waiting for them. They got in and settled back into the soft seats. As the cars drove through London, the city lights were coming on. Big Ben shone golden against the darkening sky. The River Thames looked like a long, dark ribbon with lights dancing on it. The children looked out the windows, watching their beautiful city pass by. "Did you enjoy today?" the princess asked her children. "I liked the dancing best," Louis said, remembering the colorful dancers from Ghana. "I liked the music," said Charlotte. "The choir was beautiful." George thought for a moment before answering. "I liked seeing everyone together in one place, all those countries that are part of the Commonwealth." The prince smiled at his son's answer. George was starting to understand the bigger picture of royal duties and what they meant. The princess reached over and squeezed her husband's hand. They were both proud of their children today. Soon, the cars turned through the big gates of Kensington Palace. Home at last. The palace looked warm and welcoming with lights glowing in the windows. As the cars stopped at the private entrance, staff members came out to greet them. "Welcome home. "Your Royal Highnesses," said the head housekeeper, opening the car door. "I hope you had a good day." "It was wonderful, thank you," the princess replied. "But we're all ready for a quiet evening now." The family walked into the palace together. Inside, it was warm and quiet, so different from the noise and excitement of Westminster Abbey. Louis yawned widely, not trying to hide how tired he was. Even Charlotte and George looked ready for an early night. In the family's private living room, a surprise waited. The king and queen had sent a special gift for the children. 3 small boxes sat on the coffee table, each with a child's name on it. "Look what grandfather and grandmother sent you," the prince said, pointing to the boxes. The children hurried to find their boxes. Louis opened his first. Inside was a small silver frame with a picture of him waving at his first official royal event 2 years ago. Now there was space for a new picture from today to go beside it. Charlotte found a beautiful small jewelry box in her favorite pink color. Inside was a note that said, "For a princess who makes us proud every day." George opened his box slowly. Inside was a compass that had belonged to his grandfather when he was a boy. A note said, "To help guide you on your journey." George held it carefully, understanding how special this gift was. The prince and princess watched their children with loving eyes. Today had been a big day in their young royal lives. A day they would remember when they were older. A day when they had done their duty, made their parents proud, and shown the world that the future of the royal family was in good hands. Later, after baths and bedtime stories, the princess tucked each child into bed. Louis was already half asleep as she kissed his forehead. Charlotte wanted to keep her flowers beside her bed. George asked if he could read for a little while before sleeping. When all 3 children were settled, the prince and princess went to their own sitting room. They sat close together on the sofa, tired but happy. "They were amazing today," the princess said softly. "They were," the prince agreed, "just like their mother." They looked at the early editions of tomorrow's newspapers on their tablet. There on the front pages were pictures of their family on the steps of Westminster Abbey. The headlines spoke of royal family unity and future of monarchy shines bright. The prince put his arm around his wife. Together they had faced another big public day. Together they had shown their children how to carry on the family tradition with grace and dignity. And tomorrow they would go back to being just a family again, at least until the next royal duty called.